This is Mallory, and I'm the host of She Carries the Waters, stories and oral histories of Bawating and Gitchagumi, our local territory here in Lake Superior and Batchewana First Nation. I'm here with Brenda, and if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Brenda Sayers, originally from Batchewana Bay.
So this is my mom, and we're sitting here on the shores of Lake Superior, Gitchagumi, in her home, and we were just conversing about some of the histories that she remembers as a child and just wanting to capture that and to ask any questions as well. And anything that shows up for you story-wise, just feel free to, I would invite you to look at the water when you're telling the story, so don't feel like you need to look at the camera the whole time. So with that, tell me about what you remember growing up in the village of Batchewana Bay.
I live right across from the water. I learned how to swim. My brothers taught me how to swim when I was early age. My dad was a fisherman. His dad was a fisherman. They've been always in the water. My dad taught his sons. They fished commercially. They, water was always around, even though when we were small, we weren't allowed to go across the road to the lake. We had always had a big puddle of water in the yard. So we always were in the water, my brothers and I. So I have younger siblings, but when I remember them, I'm just watching them. But I had a lot of memories with my brothers in the water, playing, torturing me with the water. But I remember my dad going out fishing, and I can still see his boat on the shore. And I remember the time when I was asked to go on the lake when he taught my brother how to fish. But my dad always said women aren't allowed on the water. They're bad luck. So eventually, after years, like when I was an adult and I had my own kids, I used to come to Batchewana back home because I moved to town. Come back home and we spend the summer up here with my 5 kids, and they were always in the water. And, we talked about my mom and dad and my uncles talking about fishing and all that. And I really wanted to try fishing myself. And my mom always wanted to go. So my dad kind of reluctantly said, yeah, well, if you really think it's easy, you really think you can do a good job, go try it. So we had our outboard motor, but he wouldn't let us go out by ourselves. So he got my Uncle Leo to come with us. So got our nets, got everything, our jugs ready, put our number on there, got Uncle Leo, we loaded up the boat, and I drove out to a couple sets that Uncle Leo showed me out in the graveyard. We went and set a couple straps and nets. We come home happy with what took us a little while, to figure out how to turn the motor so I can go in a straight line when Uncle Leo set. My mom helped him. And then we come back and we leave him out a couple of days, but those couple of days it was a really bad storm and we couldn't go out. And so the nets were in the water past the time that usually you go lift up, the next day or the day after. So it was about maybe 3 or 4 days that the nets were in the water. So by that time it was nice to go. So we loaded up the boat, Uncle Leo and my mom, and we went out, lift the nets. And so when we left, it was nice, calm shore, calm water. And then we started lifting, and then the wind picked up. And so it was those rolling waves that on the water. And of course, and that's being in those number of days, the fish that we caught early, they bloated, so they had big bellies on them. So my Uncle Leo would show my mom you have to poke the belly to let the air out, and then you squish the fish out of the nets, clear them out of the nets. So I was driving the boat because it was wavy, keeping it straight, and my mom and Leo were lifting up the fish. And so Uncle Leo would be pulling hard on the nets, and there was a lot of fish in them. So they were piling up. So my mom was poking and clearing, but her head was underneath the bow of the boat when she was reaching down. So all that air come back at her, all that rotten fish smell coming. She got sick, and then so I brought her to the back of the boat, and she just held the motor. So I went up to the front with Uncle Leo, and I was clearing, but I kept my head up. And so Uncle Leo, every time he pulled the net in, he put it down, and I was poking the fish so he would get that smell. And I remember telling him, Uncle, do you ever get sick on the boat? He goes, oh, no, I never get sick on the boat. No, I'm good that way. I said, okay. So I kept doing that, and he kept getting the whiff of the rotten guts. And next, I could see him start heaving too. And we just laughed. My mom was in the back throwing up. Uncle Leo was in the front. So it was so bad that we finished our nets and we were coming back in, and my mom couldn't handle the ride, so we pulled in over by the gut pile where we dump all the guts. She got off and she walked home, and me and Uncle Leo were coming around the bay, coming to the house, and I pulled in. Leo got off. My dad was waiting for us, and he looked, and he only seen me and Uncle Leo get off the boat. And then he comes out. He said, "Well, where is she? Where is she?" And I said, "She's coming down the road." She goes, "What?" I said, "Yeah, she got sick on the boat." He, Jesus. And he started riding, like he's in a wheelchair, so he started going towards the ball field. That's where she's cutting through. And you could see her drop to her knees and get up again. And yeah, well, he just laughed at her. And then come back home and sit at the house waiting for her. And he didn't say a word, and we didn't say a word, but that was the last of our adventures on going fish. But we did do a couple lifts, and I still have the receipt of our first sail of our adventures. But yeah, that's a nice keepsake. But yeah, the water, it was so nice. But when those waves started rolling, and they were nice rolling waves, yeah, no, never again. So that was one story.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that.
Mhm.
So just give like a brief overview, right? So you were born in Batchewana Bay on the water, and then you moved to town, which is Sault Ste. Marie, when you were 10, correct?
Yes.
And you're the oldest girl, sorry, you're the eldest girl of 9 kids, and your two brothers before you are John and Joe, and then you, and then the younger siblings. So even the responsibilities of being an eldest daughter, like in 2026, right? We have access to lights, we have access to water, demand hot water on the tap. What was it like in those earlier days that you can remember? Like, you give us some context and some detail about how it was like growing up in Batchewana Bay.
Well, there's quite a few of us in a little house. But my mom grew up with a big family too, so she knew how to manage. She lived it already, so we did good. She did good for us. She would carry water, like when Joe and John got older, they helped, carry the water from the lake to the house because we didn't have indoor plumbing. We finally got electricity, which was nice because we can cook on. We had a stove, but we always had a box stove to heat water on, for tea or whatever they liked. My dad liked the water from the lake, so he always made tea in that. I remember when a bath night, when Sundays before we go to school, we had one of those little galvanized wash tubs, and we would heat up, and she would start with the babies first, wash the babies first, and I was the third oldest, so by the time I got, it was just a couple kettles of water and just to keep it lukewarm, and it was pretty dirty by the time the older ones got in there. That's what, for that, I remember that. And then even with the washing the clothes, like I would have to help her, because I was the oldest girl. So, but she had one of those ringer washers where you push it through the rollers. And I kept bugging her to help because if I didn't help her, then I had to watch the rest of the kids. So for a nice break, I'd say, well, I can help you wash instead of watching the kids. So she would always warn me about those rollers because if it's steady going constantly, the two rollers pulling the clothes through, and on the other side would be the rinse water, and then you have to roll them back through on top of the machine before we can hang them out. So I was doing good, and one of my siblings come in or said something to me, and I took my eyes off and I put my finger was caught in the clothes, and it was going through the water, through the rollers, going up to my elbow, and I was screaming and hollering. My mom come and just hit the spring on the rollers and lifted it up. And after that, I remember it wasn't too often I was at the roller by myself. But yeah, we had to do laundry. We were lucky because a lot of them didn't have one of those washers. They had just the washboard, and you had to scrape it on. But my mom had one of them too, and she would use that for when there was a lot of bad stains, especially with Joe and John's fishing clothes. She would use that washboard on that before she would put it in the end of the cycle. The last bit she would put the fishing clothes through. Yeah.
And so you all moved to town when you were 10.
Yes, my dad got hurt in a car accident. We were 9. He was when he was fishing. He went to take up his fish up to Fairclads, and on the way back, he wanted to rest. So we lay down in the back seat of the car, and another gentleman was driving. and they rolled it at Blueberry Flats, and he broke his neck, so he was a paraplegic. They flew him out. So that was when I was 9. He stayed in Toronto until I was 10, and then we went to the Sioux. When he come back home, we had to move to the Sioux.
And that's when the youngest would have been born when he was in the hospital.
Yeah, yes.
So number 9, Joe Tom, was born in Toronto.
Yes, my mom was pregnant with Joe Tom when he got hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then after that, the family moved to town, which is 45 minutes away, leaving Lake Superior.
Yeah.
But I know you've told me briefly before, but maybe you can capture the night you remember the Edmund Fitzgerald went down.
Oh my. So that night, my mom and dad were always involved in political matters, I guess, of the land here and their home. So it was a corporation that was made in Batchewana Bay, a corporation, and what the corporation wanted to do was section all the property into lots and they wanted to commercialize the whole village. So that night there was a meeting supposed to happen regarding the corporation and finding out, or just more dealings with the property. And before, what happened was, if anybody missed the corporation, the president and vice president would give their property to somebody else. So that was history. That was, something that's going on all the time. So they refused that meeting that day. That night there was supposed to be a meeting. So they decided they had to come up. So they called up Uncle Leo and Uncle Eddie up here and said, they're on their way and we're going to make the meeting, so make sure, if we don't get there on time, just to go down and say we're coming, not to give away our property. So that night, that's when the Fitzgerald come down. So it was storming in town. It was raining hard, blowing hard. They brought me with them in case anything happened, because if anything went, the car broke down, like we couldn't take my dad out, so either one of us would stay with my dad and the other would go on foot to get help if that happened. So that was the plan. So we started coming up, and we had to pull over for gas. We gassed up in town, and as I was sitting in the back seat watching them fill up the tank, I can see the chimneys on the roofs just go ding, 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 ding. All that wind, that's how strong it was knocking the chimneys off the houses. And so we ventured on the way up, and all the low parts of the road, it was washed right out. It was water all over the place. Jones's Landing, down by the lower bay, it was covered. You couldn't tell where the road was. So we come up anyway. We kept coming up, and then we got to the village. The water's right over top of the road. It was bad. So we pulled into the house. Mom had to pull way up to the back of the yard to get my dad out. And then Leo and Eddie come over, and they were down there for the meeting, and they canceled the meeting because of the storm. But the guys, the corporation, the president was stuck in town. That's why it didn't happen. But yeah, I remember that the waves were just enormous right over the road. You couldn't tell where it was. It took us, I think, about a good hour, 45 minutes to come home. It was fierce.
And I think it's an important part just to clarify and name that corporation. That corporation, was it held by First Nations people?
No, it wasn't.
Okay, so it was non-Indigenous people giving away Indigenous people's homes and land.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that point. So, yeah, even being part of that, right? Because Gordon Lightfoot writes the gales of November. And even, to experience those gales of November, probably not like that, but it gets pretty fierce out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that water, with all that she carries, what would be some memories or some thoughts you just want to share, just for our first time sitting together in this spot? Like, what is coming up for you? Is there, like, just thinking of the generations of your family that has sat in this area, has lived in this area, not only your dad's side, but your mom's side as well, right? There's always been your lineage up here in on Gitchigumi, in the Batchewana village, holding this land for all future generations. Is there anything that kind of shows up for you as I kind of name that?
Well, water is important, because my mother's father was a farmer, so he had cattle, he had livestock, and he had gardens to water. So They had a little creek, but it wasn't enough for his cattle because it would dry up in the middle of summer. So when he bought the property, he did make an agreement with the people because he had a big farm, and across the highway was the lake. So when he did buy that farm, he did have an agreement with the people on the lakeside to have access. So that's what he did. He had access to the lake, so he brought his cattle down to the water and fed, made sure they had got their water every day. They would twice a day. They would go down in the morning, then they go down in the evening. So like it was very important. He knew the importance of water for his livelihood, and eventually his sons broke there was dams up in the back so of the creek, so it wouldn't go dry, and they would have to go up and break up the beaver dams to let the water flow. So they knew, like, it's you are 90% of water, so it's important for it, and they knew what it was, and they always kept that agreement alive right until he passed away, and then they sold the farm, and now that agreement doesn't exist because of the farm. It ceased to exist.
And anything you remember of your grandpa, Joe Tom, or anything about his fight and honor to this land and this water? Because I remember you telling me just about how, he was a very political activist person, making sure that all the First Nations people, all the Indigenous of this land, had access to rights and had access to just to life, even when their kids were being sent to residential school.
Yes, he was always involved. He started at a young age. His wife died when my father's the youngest of his clan, of his family, Joe Thomas family, and his wife Mary Jane. She passed away when my father was 9. She was sick. I can't remember what she died of, but so he was always going away even before Mary Jane got sick. He was involved in the politics and keeping the land up here, keeping it for the people of Batchewana, the original landholders that lived here. And when the school come and everything, the mines come, they wanted to, section it off and give parcels off. But he always fought, even before that, with the church. There was a lot of division, I guess. Like, they were all Catholic up here, but he knew the difference when they weren't there for the people of the village, bringing in new people. So there was a lot of issues, and I remember him, my dad and Uncle Leo and Uncle Eddie talking about him going to Ottawa all the time to fight for Batchewana Bay. And then they were talking when they were young, like after Mary Jane died, like, who would come to the house and help them, because they weren't blood relatives, but they were community members, and they helped out Joe Tom to help him raise his kids that were left at home with no mother. So, he continued that fight, and with the support of the community. So that was huge. And, they lived together. Everybody lived together. They thrived together up here. They supported each other. And when that corporation was formed, the First Nation people here made sure that, the corporation was based on the 40 families that are originally from this area. And that's how they enforced that rule. And they said, this property is for the 40 First Nation families, that it has to be handed down to them. And then as the corporation grew and become non-First Nation members, they seen how they can manipulate everybody, and that's what they did. They manipulated it, and that's how they started selling off, giving other people that didn't belong here part of the 40 families. So he always fought right to the end for the community and the people up here.
Yeah, nice. And I mentioned briefly when the school started taking the young ones around here. So your father and his brothers, Leo and Eddie, would have been sent to Spanish residential school. They would have been sent to the Spanish residential school. Do you remember, like, when did you find out that they went, or if they went, or was that ever a conversation that was had? After maybe when you realized maybe that they did go, what do you remember your thought process around any of that? Or
Well, yeah, because I didn't know anything about it until later on in life, when everybody's bringing that up about the church and that, and I didn't know. It was my dad and Uncle Eddie that went to the residential school, and Uncle Leo was sick at the time, so he was shipped off to, there was a couple that come up to the village every year from Michigan, and they seen Uncle Leo. He was always sick, so they talked to his dad, Joe Tom, and Joe Tom allowed him to go down to Michigan to be looked after medically wise. So Uncle Eddie and my dad were left here at home, and because Joe Tom was steady going abroad, with for business and for the village and that, they went to Spanish. They got shipped to Spanish, and he thought it was, he didn't understand. He didn't know what was going on in residential schools. But I remember them talking about it, my dad and my brothers and Leo and Eddie, and I remember them talking about, they wrote letters to their dad to come and get them because it was bad down there. And Joe Tom didn't get the mail. And when Joe Tom finally got word that how bad it was down there, he went down there and he took the boys out. But my dad didn't say anything about that. He wouldn't talk Indian in front of us. He would, any of his friends come over, he would tell us to go play outside, and they would stay inside and talk. Or if they were outside working on the motors or something like that with all his friends and the talking Indian, he'd tell us, go play. Like, you can't listen here, go play. We couldn't understand anyway, but they just weren't comfortable talking their own language in front of anybody that they didn't know, that was safe to them. They had to feel safe. So when that happened and this whole thing come out into the public eye, we asked my dad, things, and he wouldn't tell us. He goes, it doesn't make a difference, it's over, until he got sick. And he only told us one thing. And I remember him saying that when they were in the Spanish school, the boys would be, in one dorm and the girls were in the other dorm. He said in his dorm, you can hear the boys crying at night, crying. And Eddie was fighting all day, his fist fights. And at night he would fist fight guys. And the boy, it was because those older boys there would come and get young boys and take them to the priests and to be abused. And then even those older boys would abuse those young boys. And Eddie would stick up for them, and the ones that were being abused or know they're going to be targeted that night, they would come to Eddie, and Eddie would fight those boys. Even though Eddie wasn't as big as them, he would fight them anyway, just to leave those boys alone. And my dad said Eddie was always fighting for them. He protected my dad there, and that's the only story he told us.
So long ago, but it still can pack a punch. Yeah. Speaking of Eddie, what a powerful being he was. And then we can venture into Uncle Leo as well, because he was another beautiful character. But what would you like to share about Edward Sayers?
Eddie, Uncle Ed. He was a character for sure. He loved to tease, but he was strong in his beliefs, and he knew right from wrong, and he knew his treaties. He knew his rights, and he always fought for his rights. So the biggest thing that Eddie, I think, has accomplished in his life, and they don't even recognize him, is when we fought for Whitefish Island. And my dad, my Uncle Eddie, Uncle Leo, Joe Tom, all the boys, John, my mom, Uncle Murray, they would always come and they would talk about Whitefish Island. We're getting a land claim. We're putting a land claim in. We're going to take it. We're going to get it back. But when we got it back, they sat and they said, you know what? We won't actually own it until the only way we can own something is to live on it. That's the only way you keep your land, is to live on it, to work it. So they pulled together with other guys from the band down there. There's a lot of other guys that helped out, like Paul Stevens, Irene Stevens, Donald Surratt, Donald Jackson. So they pulled together and they built a little shack on Whitefish Island. And Eddie and the other ones, during the summer, they all took turns staying there. So there was always someone living there on the island, because we still didn't receive it back yet. So we're still fighting in court for it. So in the wintertime, everybody left, but Uncle Eddie stayed there all winter. He lived there in that little wee shed all winter. And he had a little propane stove that kept him warm, or not propane, gas stove. So Eddie would take his little gas can walk from the island and get on the bus to come down to Rankin, and he would get the gas, and he would carry that can on the bus. And the guys that drove the bus allowed him to do that. That's how he talked to them and told them what was the story, and they were sympathetic to the cause, so they allowed him to carry that gas can, like just a little one, but it was still open gas on the city bus. So he would go back to fill up his things when. But it was because of him and those other guys living on the island, Whitefish Island, that the Batchelor band got that land back. So that's Eddie. He knew that was his right. He knew that was our land. And he knew that he had to stay there to fight for it, to occupy it. So the government had to give it back to us.
Yeah. I remember this one time I was at the Rankin Arena and he was there and I was eating French fries. He's like, "Oh, what is that?" He's like, "Oh, these are French fries." He's like, "Okay, go get me some." So I had to go order for him because he didn't know, and then brought him some salt and some pepper and some vinegar, and he loved the salt, but then once he put vinegar on it, he was just like, "French fries." He was so pumped. Yeah.
I remember when he always wanted a boat. He always wanted to be on the water, Eddie. And he'd done everything. He would never buy nothing brand new. Couldn't afford it. So he'd always, pick up odds and ends and odd different motors that never worked. And him and my dad would work on it, and Joe and John, Jim would help. And so when he got sick and he had to move to town, he got sick with cancer, and he had this boat up in the back, and I think Jim was the one that was working on it and got the motor running, and he wasn't thinking at the time, and he told Eddie, "I got your motor running, whenever you feel better, in the summer you can come up and you can take it for a ride." But Eddie was on his last legs, and he knew it, and he didn't tell anybody, but you can see, that he was done. Like the cancer did the job on him, and he come up to the house and come up to Batch here, and he said, "Jim," he called him Jam. "Jam, I want to go for a ride. I just want to go for one last ride out there." And so Jim looked at him, and he just knew that if he put him in that boat, he would never come back. But that's all Eddie wanted to do, was go for that one last ride on the water. But Jim wouldn't let him, because he couldn't bear the fact that, if he put him in that boat and Eddie just jumped overboard, he couldn't live with himself. So we have to live with the fact that we didn't let him go for his one last wish. But yeah, that's what he wanted to do. That was his home too, the water.
Yeah, raised on it your whole life, right?
Yeah.
You miss it. There's a calling. There's an ache for sure.
When you're a fisherman, only people that's got that calling can do that job. You can't, that's where they thrive, on the water. And you can tell when it's too long they've been on shore. They're just antsy to get out there.
Yeah. And then give some time for Uncle Leo as well, as we sit in his home and get to think about him often and remember him fondly. Tell us about Uncle Leo.
When he asked me about Uncle Leo, all I could see is his hands. His hands were strong, smooth, and they were brown on the top and a nice beige on the bottom. Like I thought he had the best hands in the whole world. And it's because of him working steady in the water, in the fish. That slime does something to your hands where it makes it so smooth. And he was a character. He had all kinds of sayings. Oh my God. When he come over, it was something else, because my dad would just laugh, because he would come up with so many different sayings. If they were talking about somebody, and getting angry of the actions of the other person, Uncle Leo would say, if he thinks he's going to swing in my gate, he's got something else to think about, Or he'll say, "Oh, he doesn't know snot from applesauce," or something, all those different little sayings. He had so many of them, but yeah. He was a character. He was always, his nickname, when they started that corporation, he became the Poison Pen, because he would write letters upon letters upon letters to the government about what the corporation was doing to the community up here, to the land, to the people, that, this was their home. And that's what his name was, the Poison Pen. Well, the Poison Pen's at it again. I had to write another letter to the government. I had to write to Bud Wildman. He was the ombudsman here in the Sioux. So, he was always writing letters. And it worked. They formed, the corporation had their group. And so my dad, Eddie, and Leo, and my mom, they formed another group called The Voice. So that was the other side of the corporation. It was the people. And that's what they called themselves, the voice of the people here. So anything they did, anything they formed, anything letters they wrote, it was signed by the voice of Batchwana Bay. So they thought it was very important to name it the voice because they have that right, right? So he did all kinds of things. He fished. He was archaeologist too. He did surveying. He was a guide through the bush for the mining, all the mines and resources. He knew where all the mineral deposits were, the types of rocks. He was big there. He worked for the M&R doing that, guide in the mines and guiding people, all the, not the trappers, but the surveyors. He did surveying. Yeah, he did quite a bit of things in his life, Leo. Like he was well versed in a lot of different areas. They had a workshop up here to do residential school interviews and stuff like that. And because Uncle Leo never went to residential school, didn't mean that he was spared the hands of abuse. He did go to day school, Uncle Leo.
But I mean, even his return home, right? And knowing that this is his home and knowing that people needed support and advocacy, and he was willing to do all that. Mm-hmm. And he stayed here. He stayed in Batchwana Bay until he passed.
Yeah.
And he was the leading man on the dance floor at any social activity.
He was a smooth dancer, man. There's only two guys that can dance in Batchwana, like really smooth. That the ladies was old Oli Bajirno, and Uncle Leo. Uncle Leo he would never be able to sit down. He was dancing from the time the band started right till it was done. Yeah, he can dance, Uncle Leo. And he was a small man, but he can really fly on that floor. Yeah.
His little slick back hair and his shiny new shoes.
Yeah. And he had a V-neck sweater. And he had a red one. He had a red V-neck sweater, and he had a yellow one. Like a bright yellow, like a soft pastel yellow. And he looked so handsome in it. That's the two sweaters he would wear to the hotel. Yeah. With a white shirt underneath. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cute. Yeah. So I think it's a great start just for our first time sitting down together and getting to use this different technology. Is there anything you'd like to add or say, or any parts of you just feel that need to be heard right now before we kind of close up?
And other than that, like every day you get up here, when you wake up and you look out, you see the water and you know that you're blessed. Like give thanks every morning and every night that I see that water. Like, there's no place like it. Just to go out and look, whether it's calm, like glass, or it's nice, big, beautiful waves, or just a little ripple like it is now. It's something. You're blessed. You feel really good.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. Just want to say chi miigwech. And anything you'd like to add? Now that you finally look into the camera.
My little eyes.
So that's it. Bamapi.
Bamapi.